All right, welcome everyone. How's it going? So here we're here to talk about the concept of atomic notes, a modern approach to note taking. As Kevin mentioned, my name is Ben Hong. You can find me on all the Internet of Things, basically under the moniker Ben Code Zen. I believe I have a monopoly on it. But anyhow, moving on. So, fun fact about me, as I love going to amusement parks, and the rides in particular are a bit of fun. This one here is from the Jurassic Park River Adventure in Universal Studios Orlando. And if you're having trouble finding me, I'm the guy up here at the really top, with both hands up. And this is the Jurassic Park ride where you drop, like, I think something like 80 foot down. It's an absolute blast. They since updated it, I think, to the new Jurassic World theme, but highly recommended. And so, as you can see, just having an absolute blast with that. And just as I'm excited as I'm dropping down here, unlike that one though, I'm not terrified. This one, I'm here. We're excited to talk. We're here to talk about note taking. So a little bit more about me, just as far as my professional background. So I'm a developer experience engineer, and for those who don't know what that is, basically think of a software engineer and a UX designer. Those job positions like got together, had a baby, and then like they go teach things sometimes too, and then they create content too. So it's kind of a multidisciplinary aspect, but very much the engineering aspect is a big part of something that I love doing and building stuff for people. As far as open source stuff, I'm one of the Vue core team members, so I help out with docs, community, and those sort of things. So if you ever have any questions about that, happy to talk about that with you as well. But my background is actually in what is IO psychology, which is short for industrial organizational psychology. I know, it's an absolute mouthful. But in other words, I don't have a computer science background. And so earlier when we were hearing from Andrew regarding like learning different skills, and then especially we were just talking about content marketing and branding, like I felt all of that content, and I was like, yep, I've experienced that in terms of how to transition into new roles, new careers, and how to make sure that you're perceived in the right way when it comes to those things. And as always, I'm also a person who just loves learning about new things. So if you ever catch me out, in the wild, or just want to hit me up, I always love learning about what people have to talk about, and a huge avid learner at that. All that to say, all right, so why do we take notes? Well, let's kind of talk about some of the high level scenarios that we usually people think of, which is one, we want to store information that we ideally like to retrieve later. And we want to be able to engage with the material in a way that makes it easier to remember. Because after all, if we just wrote copy things or highlight things, it can make things hard to engage with, right? We were talking about learning styles earlier. And the process of transforming that information into something that you can take with you, there's like an encoding that happens there rather than just rote copying. And in addition, we want to be able to leverage work we've done in the past so we can iterate on new ideas, right? How many times have we, looked at something, we go, I'm pretty sure I wrote something on this before, but I can't remember, right? Like it's really useful to be like, oh, 6 months ago when I was working with this is what I thought, but now this is actually where my ideas have evolved. And you can kind of see and can compare and contrast where you are in that learning journey. And finally, to be honest, we don't really think of it this way, but notes are really useful ways of helping us navigate our brain as we explore unfinished thoughts and ideas that sometimes we just want to put a pin on and maybe come back to later on. But here's the thing, when it comes to traditional note taking, and I say traditional because this is kind of the world I grew up in when it comes to the world of note taking. Well, I grew up, I'm dating myself here with this image, but for the youngins in the crowd who don't know what this is, these are floppy disks. And they're basically these little, they're about this big and maybe a little smaller. And they had like 3 megabytes worth of data on there. I think it's 3.14, no, maybe I'm wrong. But anyhow, basically I would store documents on these floppy disks, and I had like a full box that would contain for like my essays or my poems, my stories, whatever. This is how I used to organize my notes. And so to contextualize that a little bit, we have memory sticks, right? Hopefully memory sticks aren't too far outdated at this point. That, that's another way that we could translate that to today. And of course, we've gone from the physical now to the digital. And what has that world been like? And I've been through all of them. As you can see here, there are lots of different note-taking apps. All of these on here, if you want to play a little game with yourself, see if you can name them. I've actually used basically all of them. I have done the Evernote to OneNote, to Apple Notes, to bullet journaling. Yes, I did paper and pencil for a while because I was like, maybe digital isn't the way to go. I mean, there's Bear here in the lower right, Google Keep, Google Docs, and of course we have to mention Notion here. Dynalist is the one on the very bottom center here, if for anyone wondering. And the thing is that like every time you move system, there's always this alert of something working better. And every time though, there's a cost to migrating, and it's just like I can't tell you the amount of time I spend moving from thing to thing. It's just astronomical. But it always left me kind of a little. There's always something kind of lacking because a lot of this, at the end of the day, it centers down into this concept of grouping your notes into folders, right? Because this is what we actually know. So here's a screenshot from one of my very old like Evernote vaults, where you can see here where I'm just talking about writing rhythms and like thinking about this whole concept. But when we think about how we often organize our notes, we think of it from the concept of these idea of notebooks. And so notebooks, essentially, if we think about it, just like a list hierarchy, right? You have your top thing here, and you group certain notes in certain notebooks, and that's that. And that's how most most note-taking strategies work these days. But to be honest, I found that to be kind of lacking. And so while this works really great, it works great up until a certain point, right? Because you're like, oh, this is great. I'm going to create all these folders. I'm going to organize them a certain way. This is fantastic. And then we hit a point which I like to call the information tipping point. In other words, where we start to get to the point where a lot of the things we're taking notes on, whether it's books and these sort of things, they often hit on multiple topics and things across different disciplines. And all of a sudden, right, if you're thinking about a book like Think Again by Adam Grant, which I highly recommend, by the way, you might think of it as like, oh, okay, this is about like thinking about like idea processing. There's kind of a philosophy aspect of it. So maybe you stick it there, but then there's a whole aspect of personal growth there too. So do you also stick it in your personal growth, journal? Like where does it go? And do you duplicate content? How do you deal with that? And I don't know about you. This often led me to a kind of decision paralysis of like, well, shoot, this kind of applies to multiple places, but all the frameworks around note taking kind of forced me to choose one or the other and then maybe tag the right one. I don't know. How does this really work? And then on top of that, there's this great, I don't know, this is not quite a meme, but there was this post I saw where it was like, my mind is like an internet browser. I got 19 tabs open, 3 are frozen, and I have absolutely no idea where the music is coming from. Now, I think since this has come out, I think Chrome and other ones have gotten better about like putting the little audio icon in the right tab so you actually know where the music is coming from. But like that was a real problem at one point. But we have all these ideas and things running through our heads a lot. And it's like, how the heck do we deal with all this? And so there's this is kind of this illustration of like all these different ideas, touching all these different regions of our brains. But once again, the concept of organizing things in folders always felt a little bit restricting. So here is a live capture of me as I'm trying to organize my notes because frankly, like it's frustrating because you're like, but this goes here and here, but these also connect, but then this can only live in this. And what the heck do I actually do? Okay, so that being said, let's dive into some of the specific things about note taking, some of my frustrations with traditional note taking. So first off, here's the meme here that says, she said sticky notes would help. Now I can't find the door. So you can envision, you put sticky notes everywhere to the point where you've covered the door and you've kind of made other things useless. And my thing about taking notes, I mean, I don't know about you, I've taken plenty of notes in the past where I forgot where I put it, or I couldn't reference it anymore, right? I have this giant vault, I have this beautiful thing of documents, links everywhere, but for some reason, it always eludes me. And that really sucks because you spend all this time writing stuff down, and then yet when you go to find it, it's something that, frankly, is super elusive. And this is even harder. We're talking about notes from years ago, right? If you're talking about things you're working on currently, it's kind of easy to navigate. But the whole point of note taking, if you think about it, is this idea of a cumulative knowledge base. Tiago Forte kind of termed this idea of a second brain. If you haven't heard of that before, that's kind of where this is. The whole idea is that you have all these notes and it's building up, but like, how do you find the thing? How do you make it useful and applicable? And this is why I think a lot of people do end up giving up. So to reiterate, notes are great when you can actually find them at the actual right time, right? They need to be contextual to what you're using them in. Here is if you haven't watched, oh gosh, it was Zootopia, right? This is the sloth very slowly pressing in, giving the stamp, right? There's a whole running gag with that, which they did a phenomenal job with. And I don't know about you, but man, some of those note-taking apps can be slow. And for me, this is absolutely it kills the mood because when you want to take something note, you want to quickly jot something down, a lot of times you need to like get the idea down and kind of move on, right? But if you got to open up the app, it's got to load, it's got to fetch the database. Oh wait, hold on, it's having trouble with your internet connection. All right, then it's open. Then you're like, okay, now I got to open the journal. And then that's the inspiration is gone, right? This is why I think so many people with the notes, this is why sticky notes and why people just resort to their default note apps on phone is because a lot of times they just need to get something down. But of course, again, the downside of like just quickly jotting something down and not having something to connect it all is that eventually that stuff gets lost. All right, here's a meme that also popped up on the note-taking kind of Reddit forums. I wish I could have found the originator at this point, but this kind of illustrates the point that I was saying before, where whether you're taking from, you might start simply with notes, but then, especially with nowadays with tooling of note-taking, it can feel like you're creating this entirely complex system that you spend almost more time managing than you are in your notes, which is kind of like project planning your life instead of actually experiencing your life. And so with note taking too, especially if you get into the digital realm, it can be really tempting to overcomplicate things because there's a lot of shiny new things to play with. And so here is another tweet that I think really sums up one of my key frustrations with a lot of the digital note-taking app. It's from MacBook Miller, and it reads, "Yet another note-taking app raises a $5.6 million seed, and let's read the TechCrunch article to try to figure out why." If we zoom in on a little bit, the sum of this here is that the hope between the founders and investors of MEM is that the team can leverage the platform's intelligence over time to better understand the data dump from your brain and likely other information sources across your digital footprint to know you better than any ad network or social media graph does. I don't know about you, but I don't really want my notes to be fed into some machine learning algorithm that then is like using it to feed me ads. And more important, to learn all this stuff about me that I'm not ready to expose, because a lot of times when we're taking notes, these are unprocessed ideas and they're incredibly private. And so I would argue that for most people's notes, this is arguably the most intimate source of information about you, because you're still filtering. You're still like, this idea sounds dumb, but I'm not sure. Let me take a look at that later. Like, if you have something ingesting that immediately, it's going to be like, Ben thought this idea was dumb. Like, no, that's not exactly what it is at all. But it's, so it's this key whole thing around data privacy that is one of my major criticisms of some of the major note-taking apps, because eventually that seems to be where a lot of them go to when it comes to the profitability of note-taking apps. And so to me, it's a hard nope with this sort of bit. And so let's talk a little bit about modern note-taking then, and what it is, right? Because now we've talked about the frustration and what hopefully I think some of you have had these shared experiences with. And so there's this guy named Nicholas Luhmann, who at one point, this is like before computers were kind of readily distributed and that kind of stuff, was really thinking about how to better connect the ideas. And so he came up with this idea of a Zettelkasten, which sounds really fancy, but it's really just German for the word note box. So it's kind of like how in Lion King, like Simba means lion, like Zettelkasten just means note box. Really not that fancy. And so you can see here you have different filing cabinets of what are ultimately notes. And what are notes in this system, right? They're really here. We have an example of an index card from Nicholas's sort of Zettelkasten. And what we have here is in the lower left, we have this ID that he wrote. This is card number 1. And then he would then find ways to connect and relate the different notes together as he's exploring ideas. So he would be like, oh, this philosophy thing, pick here, we're going to relate to 1.2. We're going to connect the different things. And so this might sound like, okay, why do this with pen and paper, right? What's the advantage of this is that it was easy to be modular in this note-taking box, because as long as you reference the ID, it really didn't matter that how the ideas were related or sort of grouped together in the different drawers, because you knew that if you wanted to find a particular thread, you could follow this thread of IDs to connect something together. And so to better illustrate this, oh, actually, 1 second. And so you might be thinking, how productive could someone be spending all this time meticulously writing down and IDing all these cards? Well, he had apparently about 90,000 cards by the time he finished. And what did he do with that? He wrote over 400 articles and apparently published over 70 books. I don't know about you, that's mighty impressive. Because I mean, even with all the computer and tech gadgets we have these days, I'm not sure most people can lay claim to even like, let's just say 2 books. Well, actually 1 book would probably be an achievement. I still haven't written a book in its entirety. Yet he was able to do this with such gusto, such vigor, and he had so many different interests. That's the other thing too. Nicholas, if you ever look into his background, was like I think sociology. He had a lot of different stuff. That's interesting. Yet he was able to bring all this stuff together in a really concrete way. And that is what was really exciting for this sort of modern note-taking community, as like this trend that's happening. And that's one of the reasons I call it modern, is because the idea itself is not really new in that regard. It's kind of like we're bringing back something and recontextualizing it to what we live with today. And so, okay, so the whole concept of atomic notes we're going to define now that we have all this background and context. is this idea that, okay, so you have this idea, right? We'll keep every idea as a single box, and we'll just give them simple IDs of numbers. So we have idea number 1, right? And so we take this note, this is great, idea 1's good. We go on, we have idea 2, and then we go ahead, boom, idea 3. These all exist. Basically, you can imagine different documents, it works. So over time, you come back, you're like, I want to revisit idea 2 real quick. So let's go ahead and continue that concept. What do we got? Well, we got idea 2A, 2B, 2C. This follows like a nice thread. And they're all connected, right? You can see if there's a theme, 2 connects them all together. Then you can imagine that we'll go to 1 at some point and we say, hey, look, we have these other ideas too that we want to relate. Ideas 1A, 1B, 1C. This is great. But here's the thing, though. This is where note-taking gets complicated, is that at some point, usually when you're starting to connect ideas and you're starting to get these new perspectives, you might at some point say, well, okay, so what happens if I want to take 2A, but it's actually threaded to 1C that goes to 1A, that then connect to 3, then 2C. And this is actually in itself an innovative idea, like all on its own. And so in an ideal world, right, using the notebox contents, what you would do is you'd pick out these different index cards and you say, okay, let's align them up together. And this is, boom, this is one idea. And this is really cool. But I would argue right now that in current note-taking form, well, the way most people do it is you're probably just copy and pasting from one section of a document and just like putting it in like a document, like in a single thread. But then again, you lose that relationship because all of a sudden you're in like a completely different box if we were to visualize this. And here's the other problem too, is that what happens when you have an idea thread that's called idea thread 4? 4 has also these 4B, 4C, 4D, but actually 4C's relationship here is also to 1C. Again, this is kind of like the visualization of what I was talking about before. The problem with this is that we end up in a situation where we have duplicate content. And so what happens now if in the midst of going, you're inspired, you're working on idea 4, and you update 1C, but based on the way the documents are structured, especially in today's note-taking, the other 1C in the thread with 2A, 1C, 1A, 3, and 2C, that one is now out of date. So how do you manage that? Do you like go back and update it with the context? Like, that's a lot to do. And so the idea of atomic notes is really from those who coming from either programming, design, sort of thing, is the idea of like individual pieces of context that can then be used within different contexts, but then share all that responsibility. So in other words, as we can see here, in an ideal world, what we'd have is 4 can link to 1C as well as 2A, and then it can branch accordingly. And then when you update 1C, it actually updates both at the same time. Okay, that all said and done, you're probably looking at me. And so for those who if you can't see the meme, this is the skeptical cat. And skeptical cat is skeptical because you're saying, Ben, how does that really work? So let's go ahead and do a little demo. All right. What I have open here is an app called Obsidian. And I want to show you how some of these ideas can be illustrated. And so to start off, what is Obsidian? Obsidian is just a note-taking app that you download onto your machine, and it works with markdown files. That's all it is. In other words, plain text files, no proprietary database or anything. And so what's beautiful about this is you can see here I have my You Got This Conf note up, fall 2023. And I have this stuff here. And what I want to do is show you by basically like live demo, who knows what will happen on this. We have this talk here from Esther earlier, where we're talking about content marketing. And so how might this work in that context? Well, as you can see here, I've taken some notes already from her talk. Like I kind of grabbed her about section, introing it from the site. But then we can see here that when we're looking through the notes, this looks like any other note. You're probably thinking like, okay, what's so interesting about this? Well, we can go through this and we can actually use new like concepts that we learned from atomic note-taking to actually break this up. So for example, here, we're talking about like what content marketing is. And while that's useful in the context of the fact that this talk is the one that introduced it, I really kind of want content marketing to be something that I can take notes on separately. And so in Obsidian, what you can do is you can very easily create links with this sort of double square bracket syntax. And what this does is this actually creates a brand new node. So actually, I'm going to go ahead and actually split this up onto its side. And then what I can do, I can be like, OK, what was interesting about this? Well, let's see. So we can talk about the what is here. And then we can add that here. And so boom, that's good. And then the other thing that's interesting, too, is that this is about creating, OK, cool, about creating and distributing content. This is great. And so, OK, and so just this alone is super helpful because why? This means that going forward, whenever, like, let's say I close this. And I'm thinking, okay, so we close all this out for now. And in the future, we're thinking, oh, what do I do about that? I have this, there's this great content marketing talk I saw. Shoot, I can't remember what it is. Let me try to look for it. So with an system like Obsidian, one of the things I tend to recommend is that rather than always creating a new note, you actually default to searching for notes, because that way you can see if you have something that already exists. And if it doesn't, then you create it. So this is from like content marketing. I do have one here. And actually, if you see here, Obsidian actually does the fuzzy searching and actually shows me the talk already. But let's just assume that didn't happen. Let's say I misnamed her talk for whatever reason. The thing about relationships that we talk about with being able to find notes, you'll see here that with an app like Obsidian, and other ones are starting to implement this too, by the way, like Notion, Roam, there's a bunch of other ones. You see here that it actually says where this note was actually mentioned before. So I can actually go backwards and be like, oh yeah, there you go. That's my content marketing. And then, oh yeah, this was the talk that Esther gave. And where did she give it actually? Oh yeah, it's linked to You Got This Conf, and I can go backwards. And what's cool about this is you're no longer like kept to a very standard way of thinking of your notes in terms of like it has to top down from topics, and you can kind of start from whatever your brain makes sense. And so, I know we're limited on time today. So again, here's an example of what I did with Andrew's talk earlier, where I came through, I was linking through different things, right? He talked about, for example, experiential learning. I created a note on experiential learning. And then in addition to that, one of the things that Obsidian particularly lets you do is you can create, like, you can go beyond text to like draw stuff. And again, like all this stuff can be related together and connected in a way that makes sense to you. And the other thing too that I'll want to make a quick mention of is that Obsidian has this whole concept of aliases, which I think all note-taking apps should really think about, which is the fact that you can rename the same file to different titles, so that if this is how you think of it, you can keep the official title, but you can also add other things that you can reference it. So if I think about this as like Kevin's Awesome Conference, so right, Kevin's Awesome Conference, what's cool about this is if I look up Kevin Conference, you'll see that it says Kevin's Awesome Conference, and the fact that it's referencing the You Got This Conf. And of course, I have so many other things I could show you regarding this. But what I'm trying to show you here is the illustration between creating relationship between your nodes in a way that allows for a graph relationship. And so what do I mean by that? I mean the fact that if we take a look, actually, you can see here how the You Got This Conf nodes relates to one another. And then if we extend this out a little bit by adding an additional depth, and then actually let me close that and close all of these here real quick. I broke it. Oh, I know what I did. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, so you can see here that there you go. We see all like how things relate. And there's whole things that could be possible. There's a lot of things that we can talk about when it comes to things being possible. But finally, the thing I do want to illustrate, because you're probably wondering how do the things work in terms of connection. If we wanted to actually include something, let's say from Esther's talk in this, let's say in content marketing, I really found that there was a section, a quote that she had. One of the things I can do is I can actually embed directly through her note a reference to something in particular she said. So for example, I really like the fact that she mentioned that like ads can feel intrusive and are not as effective in building trust with customers. And you can see here now what I've done is I've actually included it in the note. But what's great about this now is that if I go back to Esther's talk here, right here, I forgot to split that up. Anyhow, and then I update this. Let's see. I lost it. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Now when we go back here, you can see it's updated accordingly. So this opens up so much possibility for what you can and cannot do with notes. And so just to show you what my graph has looked like over the time, what's possible, like one of the reasons we call it a second brain is because the network of ideas that we have and how things connect is vast in a way that we can barely comprehend, I think, a lot of times when in the midst of note taking. But through these concepts of relationships and having atomic notes that they can create and be broken up and used in different places, you really allow yourself this really beautifully intricate way of connecting those ideas together. And so my final thought on this, in terms of next steps for those who are looking to learn more about this, because again, this is kind of like the shortened version and kind of what could be possible. Please be sure to check out Obsidian's website, obsidian.md. It's completely free to try out, so nothing attached to their pricing wise. And then if you're looking for things to read, How to Take Smart Notes by I think Songke Arens. Apologize if I butchered the pronunciation of that. Fantastic book on sort of nerding out on note-taking techniques. And then you also have Building a Second Brain by Tiago Forte, another really popular book. And finally, if you like learning cohorts and that kind of thing, there's Linking Your Thinking by Nick Milo, and he's fantastic as well. So another resource for you to consider. Other than that, thanks to everyone for spending time with me to talk about notes today. Again, if you're looking for me on the Internet of Things, you can find me under Ben Kozen. So my site is benkozen.io, and you can find all my handles and everything through there. So with that, yeah, I think Kevin, I think we're good to go.